A beautiful woman like you doesn't have to stress herself like this, he said, his hand grazing my arm as though it was his right. Oh, sir, I don't mind, I replied, keeping my voice light. I like the experience. His palm slid lower, bolder now. Well, it bothers me, seeing you work so late. You don't have to. One word from me, and I can get you that promotion. A new office, more pay. All it takes is one recommendation from me. I tilted my chin up, forcing my eyes to meet his. That's not possible, sir. It takes at least 3 years before anyone even makes partner. He smirked, pinning me against the wall. Rules bend, when I want them to. For you, they'll bend. I let the silence stretch, let him believe the calculation on my face was hesitation, not disgust. Finally, I whispered, okay, sir. His grin widened as he walked over to the leather sofa and sat down, spreading his legs with practiced entitlement. He beckoned me forward. I obeyed, every step rehearsed, every move precise. When I finally lowered myself onto his lap, I ground against him, leaned close enough for my lips to brush his ear, and whispered. Mr. David, you're under arrest. The door burst open. Officers swarmed the room, cuffs gleaming. His smirk vanished as his wrists were twisted behind his back. I straightened, fixing my blouse with calm precision. What the hell is this? David Morrison sputtered, his face flushing red as Detective Sarah Chen read him his rights. This is entrapment. I'll have your badges. Actually, I said, pulling out my badge and letting it catch the light from his expensive desk lamp, this is justice. It had taken a year. A year to avenge my friend, to finish what she couldn't. She had lost everything when she tried to fight him, her job, her credibility, even her place in this city. They called her a liar. They made her disappear. But I stayed. I played the long game. And in the end, I proved she was right. My name is Detective Maya Rodriguez, and until tonight, David Morrison thought I was just another young associate at his prestigious law firm, desperate for advancement and naive enough to believe his promises. He was half right, I was desperate, but not for what he thought.
18 months earlier, I had been living a completely different life. I was Detective Maya Rodriguez with the Seattle PD, specialized in white-collar crime, happy in my career, and engaged to a wonderful man named James. My best friend since law school, Isabella Chen, was making partner at Morrison, Klein and Associates, one of Seattle's most prestigious law firms. Everything was perfect until Isabella called me at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday night, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her words. Maya, she gasped between sobs, I need you. Something terrible happened. I threw on clothes and drove to her apartment in Capitol Hill. I found Isabella on her bathroom floor, still in her torn business suit, her makeup smeared with tears and something else, shame so deep it seemed to emanate from her very core. He forced himself on me, she whispered. David Morrison forced me to sleep with him. The words hit me like a physical blow. David Morrison was a name I knew well, managing partner of Morrison, Klein and Associates, pillar of the legal community, married to a prominent judge, father of 3. His face regularly graced the society pages of Seattle magazines. We need to get you to a hospital, I said, reaching for her. No, Isabella grabbed my wrist. I can't. Maya, you don't understand. It wasn't violent. He made it seem like a choice. Like if I wanted to make partner, if I wanted a future at the firm, this was just expected. I helped her to the couch and listened as she told me everything. How Morrison had been grooming her for months with late-night work sessions, private dinners, casual touches that became increasingly inappropriate. How he had trapped her in his office that evening, using her ambition against her, making it clear that her career depended on her compliance. He said no one would believe me, Isabella continued. He said I had been flirting with him, that I had led him on, that if I reported anything, he would make sure I never worked in law again. I held my friend as she cried, my mind already working through possibilities. The problem was, Morrison was right about one thing it would be difficult to prove. Sexual harassment cases, especially against powerful men, were notoriously hard to win. Without physical evidence or witnesses, it would be her word against his. "We can do this," I told her. "I'll help you every step of the way." But over the following weeks, I watched Morrison's prediction come true. Isabella reported the assault to the firm's human resources department, only to be told that there had been no complaints about Morrison in his 20-year career. When she filed a police report, the investigating officer was polite but skeptical. Morrison had alibis, character witnesses, and a sterling reputation. Meanwhile, Isabella's life unraveled. Work assignments dried up. Partners who had previously mentored her suddenly became unavailable. Colleagues avoided her in the hallways. Within 3 months, Isabella was pushed out of the firm, not fired, which would have created liability, but made so uncomfortable that staying became impossible. The police investigation stalled. Morrison hired the city's best criminal defense attorney. Character witnesses lined up to testify to his integrity. The prosecutor eventually declined to file charges, citing insufficient evidence. Isabella spiraled into depression. She couldn't find work at any major firm in Seattle. Her savings dwindled. James and I watched helplessly as our brilliant, driven friend became a shadow of herself. "He was right," Isabella told me 6 months after the assault. "No one believes me. I've lost everything." That's when I made a decision that would change both our lives forever.
"I'm going undercover," I announced to Isabella over coffee at our usual spot near Pike Place Market. The autumn rain painted streaks down the cafe windows, and Isabella looked as gray as the Seattle sky. "What do you mean?" she asked, stirring her latte without really seeing it. "I'm taking a leave of absence from the police force. I'm going to law school at night and getting a job at Morrison's firm." Isabella's eyes widened. "Maya, no. You can't throw away your career for me." "I'm not throwing it away. I'm investing it." I leaned forward, my voice dropping. "Morrison thinks he's untouchable because he's smart, because he's careful, because he chooses victims who won't be believed. But he made one mistake: he let his success make him cocky. Predators escalate, Isabella. Always. If he did this to you, he's done it before, and he'll do it again." Isabella shook her head. "Even if that's true, how could you possibly get close enough to prove anything?" I had already thought this through. "I'll create a new identity. Not completely false, that would be illegal, but I'll use my maiden name, claim I went to a different undergrad school before law school. I'll be Maya Santos, ambitious law student looking for paralegal work. Someone exactly like his type." His type? Young, driven, financially vulnerable. Someone with everything to lose and everything to gain. Someone who might be desperate enough to compromise her principles for advancement. Isabella was quiet for a long moment. "This is dangerous, Maya. If he finds out who you really are." "He won't. I've spent my entire career creating false identities for undercover work. This is just longer term." Over the following months, I meticulously constructed my new life. I enrolled in Seattle University's evening law program under my maiden name, Maya Santos. I created a believable backstory: grew up in Portland, graduated from Portland State, worked as a paralegal in smaller firms. I studied Morrison's patterns, his preferences, his history. The research revealed what I had suspected. Isabella wasn't his first victim. Over the past decade, at least 5 young women had left Morrison's firm under mysterious circumstances. 2 had filed complaints that were quietly settled with non-disclosure agreements. Another had attempted suicide 6 months after leaving the firm. The pattern was clear, but the evidence was buried under legal protections and corporate silence. Getting hired at Morrison, Klein and Associates required patience. I applied for a paralegal position and was initially rejected. They weren't hiring. But I knew Morrison's habits now. He worked late, often staying until 9 or 10 p.m. I began frequenting the coffee shop across from his building, timing my presence to coincide with his evening departures. It took 3 weeks before he noticed me. Young woman in business attire, always carrying law textbooks, always alone. I made sure to look stressed, overwhelmed, exactly the kind of person who might need help. The first time he approached me was on a Thursday evening in January. Snow was falling softly outside the coffee shop when he slid into the seat across from me. "Law student?" he asked, nodding toward my constitutional law textbook. I looked up, feigning surprise. "Oh, yes. Evening program at SU. Are you an attorney?" He smiled, extending his hand. "David Morrison. I run a firm downtown." I widened my eyes appropriately. "Morrison, Klein and Associates? I've heard of you. That's incredibly impressive. We're always looking for bright students," he said. "Are you working while you're in school?" "Paralegal work," I replied. "Nothing as prestigious as your firm, I'm sure." He leaned back, studying me. "What's your name?" "Maya Santos." "Maya Santos," he repeated, as if testing how it sounded. "You know, we might have an opening coming up. Why don't you send me your resume?" Hook, line, and sinker. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in Morrison's conference room, signing my employment contract as a junior paralegal. The firm occupied 2 floors of a glass tower in downtown Seattle, all marble and mahogany and the kind of understated wealth that whispered rather than shouted. Morrison introduced me around the office with particular attention, his hand resting on my lower back just a moment too long as he guided me from office to office. The other employees' reactions told me everything I needed to know. The women looked at me with a mixture of pity and warning. The men seemed amused, as if they were watching a familiar show. "Maya will be working primarily with me," Morrison announced to the staff. "She's very promising." My supervisor was Jennifer Walsh, a partner in her 40s who had survived at the firm by becoming invisible. During my first day orientation, she pulled me aside. "A word of advice," she said quietly. "Mr. Morrison is very hands-on with his mentoring. Maintain professional boundaries." It was as close to a warning as she dared give. Morrison's grooming process was methodical. First came the special assignments, research projects that required working late, weekend document reviews that happened to coincide with times when the office was nearly empty. He would order dinner to the office, expensive meals that he insisted were just practical since we were working so hard. "You're very dedicated," he told me during one of these sessions, 6 weeks into my employment. We were alone in the conference room, reviewing depositions for a complex corporate case. "I appreciate dedication. It's rare in young people today." "I want to succeed," I replied, playing my part perfectly. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes." The phrase hung between us like bait. Morrison's eyes glinted with interest. "Whatever it takes," he repeated. "That's an admirable attitude. I think we're going to work very well together." By month 3, the inappropriate comments began. Compliments about my appearance that crossed professional lines. Observations about my personal life that suggested he was paying closer attention than appropriate. When I mentioned that my student loans were overwhelming, his interest sharpened visibly. "Financial stress can be devastating for someone with your potential," he said. "Perhaps there are ways I could help with that." The trap was being set, just as it had been with Isabella and the others before her. Meanwhile, I was gathering evidence. Every inappropriate comment was documented. Every late-night session was recorded when legally possible. I photographed his behavior patterns, noted which employees seemed to avoid him, identified potential witnesses who might corroborate a pattern of behavior. The breakthrough came when I befriended Marissa Kim, a former associate who had left the firm abruptly 2 years earlier. She was working at a smaller practice now, having been effectively blacklisted from major firms after her departure from Morrison's. "He told everyone I was unstable," Marissa confided when I finally gained her trust. "That I had made up stories about him because I couldn't handle the pressure of the job." "What really happened?" I asked. Marissa's story was horrifyingly familiar. The late nights, the inappropriate touching, the quid pro quo propositions. When she had rejected Morrison's advances, he had systematically destroyed her career. "I have recordings," she admitted quietly. "Audio from my phone." I was trying to gather evidence, but when I tried to use them, his lawyers claimed they were illegally obtained. "Can I hear them?" What Marissa played for me was damning, Morrison's voice clearly propositioning her, describing in explicit detail what he expected in exchange for career advancement. But she was right about the legal problems. The recordings had been made without proper consent in a two-party consent state. That's when I realized I needed to do more than just gather evidence. I needed to create an environment where Morrison would incriminate himself legally and definitively. I began working with Detective Chen from the Special Victims Unit, Isabella's former partner who had been frustrated by the limitations of the original investigation. Together, we developed a strategy that would be both legal and effective. The plan required me to go deeper into Morrison's web, to become the perfect victim, someone he would feel confident enough to assault while being recorded by hidden cameras and microphones placed with proper warrants based on the evidence I had already gathered. By month 6, Morrison's behavior had escalated exactly as I had predicted. The casual touches became lingering embraces. The work dinners became invitations to his private club. The compliments became explicit commentary about my body, my potential, what I could achieve if I was smart about opportunities. "You remind me of myself when I was starting out," he told me during one of our late-night sessions. "Hungry. Willing to do what others won't." I had perfected the role of the eager but naive young woman. I asked questions that stroked his ego, sought his advice on everything from legal research to career strategy. I made myself indispensable while appearing completely dependent on his approval. "I don't know what I'd do without your guidance," I told him one evening as we reviewed contracts in his office. "Everyone else here treats me like I'm invisible." "They're jealous," Morrison replied, moving his chair closer to mine. "They see how much attention I give you, how much potential you have. They know you're going places." His hand found my knee under the table. I forced myself not to flinch. "Where am I going?" I asked, playing innocent. "That depends on how smart you are," he said, his thumb making small circles on my leg. "How willing you are to understand how things really work." The wire I wore captured every word. The hidden cameras Detective Chen's team had installed during a weekend security upgrade recorded every gesture. Morrison was building his own case against himself, one inappropriate touch at a time. The other evidence was piling up too. Financial records showed Morrison had paid substantial settlements to former employees through shell companies. Email traces revealed communications with private investigators hired to dig up dirt on women who had complained about him. Phone records connected him to journalists who had written negative stories about his accusers. Morrison wasn't just a predator, he was a predator with a system. The final phase required the most dangerous acting of my life. Morrison had invited me to his office for what he claimed was a special project review on a Friday night when the building would be nearly empty. I knew what he really intended. The pattern was always the same: isolation, proposition, assault, then the threat that ended careers. "You've been working here almost a year now," he said as I entered his office that evening. "Time for your real performance review." I had rehearsed this moment countless times with the undercover team. Every word, every gesture, every response was calculated to give Morrison enough rope to hang himself while ensuring the encounter would be legally admissible in court. "I hope I've met your expectations," I replied, setting down my briefcase with trembling hands, not from fear, but from rage I had been holding back for months. "Oh, you've exceeded them," Morrison said, locking the office door behind me. "The question is whether you're ready to exceed them even more."
As Morrison was led away in handcuffs, his protests echoing down the hallway, I finally allowed myself to feel the weight of what I had accomplished. But the satisfaction was bittersweet. This moment had cost me more than anyone knew. Detective Chen approached me as I gathered my things from Morrison's office. "Outstanding work, Rodriguez. The DA says this is the strongest case they've seen against a perpetrator of this profile. I nodded, watching through the window as Morrison was placed in the back of a police car. What about the other victims? Marissa Kim has agreed to testify now that there's corroborating evidence. 2 other former employees have come forward. Your undercover work opened the floodgates. That was the goal, but it felt hollow. Isabella should have been here to see this moment. She should have been the one to watch Morrison's empire crumble. 6 months into my undercover assignment, Isabella had taken her own life. The note she left said she couldn't bear living in a world where monsters like Morrison went unpunished. She had died believing that her sacrifice meant nothing, that he would continue hurting women with impunity. I had found her body. The funeral was small, attended mostly by law school friends and a few relatives who flew in from California. Morrison sent flowers, an enormous arrangement with a card expressing his condolences for the loss of such a troubled but promising young attorney. The hypocrisy was staggering. That night, I made a vow at Isabella's graveside. Morrison would pay for what he had done to her, to Marissa, to all the others. I would finish what Isabella had started, no matter what it cost me. The personal cost had been higher than I anticipated. Maintaining the undercover identity for a year had required me to lie to everyone I loved. James, my fiancé, believed I was on an extended undercover assignment that I couldn't discuss. The strain of living a double life while grieving Isabella and enduring Morrison's increasingly aggressive behavior had pushed our relationship to the breaking point. 3 months ago, James had given me an ultimatum. Whatever this assignment is, it's changing you. You come home angry, distant, like you're carrying something too heavy to share. Either trust me enough to tell me what's happening, or we need to take a break. I couldn't tell him. The operation was too sensitive, the legal requirements too strict. So James moved out of our shared apartment, leaving behind an engagement ring and a note saying he would wait for me to come back to yourself, but he couldn't watch me disappear any longer. Now, as I watched Morrison's police car disappear into Seattle traffic, I wondered if the woman James had fallen in love with still existed, or if she had been sacrificed along with everything else to bring Morrison down. 3 weeks later, I sat in the witness stand in King County Superior Court, no longer Maya Santos, the naive paralegal, but Detective Maya Rodriguez, testifying about the most complex undercover operation of my career. Morrison sat at the defense table in his expensive suit, but his usual confidence had evaporated. The man who had once controlled the careers and lives of dozens of women now looked small and defeated. "Detective Rodriguez," the prosecutor asked, "can you describe for the jury what the defendant said when he believed he was alone with the undercover officer?" I repeated Morrison's words verbatim, watching the jury's faces as they heard the recording of his proposition. Several jurors looked physically ill. One older woman glared at Morrison with undisguised disgust. Morrison's defense attorney tried to paint me as an overzealous cop who had entrapped an innocent man, but the evidence was overwhelming. The recordings, the financial records, the testimony from other victims, it all painted a picture of a predator who had used his position to systematically abuse women for years. When Marissa Kim took the stand, her testimony was devastating. She described not just her own assault, but Morrison's threats afterward, his network of contacts who had helped blacklist her from employment, the way he had weaponized the legal system against his victims. He told me that no one would ever believe a Korean woman over a respected white attorney, Marissa testified. He said he had done this before and would do it again because women like me were disposable. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all charges: sexual assault, extortion, conspiracy, obstruction of justice. Morrison was sentenced to 12 years in prison and ordered to pay millions in restitution to his victims. His law license was permanently revoked. His wife filed for divorce within a week of the verdict. But the victory felt incomplete, without Isabella there to see it. After the trial, I returned to the Seattle PD, but everything had changed. The case had made national news. Female detective goes undercover for a year to catch predatory attorney. I received commendations and job offers, but I felt disconnected from it all. James came to the sentencing hearing, sitting in the back row. Afterward, he found me outside the courthouse. "I understand now why you couldn't tell me," he said. "Isabella was lucky to have a friend like you." "Was she?" I asked. "I couldn't save her." "You saved the others," James replied. "You made sure what happened to her would never happen again." We talked for hours that day, walking through the city as I told him everything I had endured during the undercover assignment. The late nights with Morrison, the constant fear of discovery, the weight of carrying so many women's stories while being unable to share the burden with anyone. "I don't know if I'm the same person you fell in love with," I admitted as we stood on the dock where he had proposed 2 years earlier. James was quiet for a moment, watching the ferries cross Elliott Bay. "Maybe you're not. Maybe you're someone even stronger." 6 months later, I left the Seattle PD to start my own consulting firm, helping organizations develop better policies for preventing workplace harassment and supporting victims who came forward. My first client was a tech startup whose female employees had been facing systematic discrimination. My second was a university dealing with sexual assault allegations against a prominent professor. I specialized in cases where traditional law enforcement hit walls, where victims needed someone who understood both the legal system and the psychology of predators. The work was challenging, but fulfilling in a way police work had never been. Morrison's conviction opened doors for other victims. The law firm that bore his name was dissolved within a year. Several of his former partners faced their own investigations. The legal community in Seattle was forced to confront uncomfortable truths about how they had enabled predators for decades. On the anniversary of Isabella's death, I visited her grave with flowers and news of Morrison's latest setback. His first appeal had been denied. The headstone read, "Isabella Chen, Advocate for Justice." Below that, an inscription I had chosen. "She fought so others wouldn't have to." But as I stood there in the cemetery, I realized Isabella had been wrong about one thing. She had thought her fight was meaningless, that Morrison would never face consequences. She couldn't see that sometimes justice takes longer than we want, arrives in ways we don't expect, and requires sacrifices that seem unbearable at the time. Morrison's arrest had inspired other women to come forward, not just against him, but against other predators in positions of power. The ripple effects were still spreading through Seattle's legal community, through corporate boardrooms, through any environment where powerful men had believed themselves untouchable. Isabella's courage to speak up, even when no one believed her, had planted seeds that eventually grew into Morrison's downfall. My year undercover had simply been the harvest. As I walked away from the cemetery, my phone buzzed with a text from a new client, a young woman whose boss had been making inappropriate advances, who had heard about my work through a network of survivors who now supported each other openly. The long game never really ends. There's always another predator who thinks he's smarter than the system, another victim who deserves justice, another wrong that needs to be made right. I had learned to play that game better than most, and I would keep playing it as long as there were women who needed someone to finish what they started. Morrison thought he had won when he destroyed Isabella. He thought power and privilege made him invincible. He was wrong. Sometimes the most devastating victories are the ones that take years to achieve, the ones that require losing yourself to find something stronger. I had sacrificed my old life, my relationship, my sense of safety, but I had gained something more valuable. I had learned that justice isn't always immediate, but it can be inevitable if you're willing to wait, to plan, and to play the longest game of all. The envelope Isabella had tried to deliver to the authorities 18 months ago had contained evidence they weren't ready to believe. But the evidence I delivered in that courtroom was impossible to ignore. In the end, Morrison had taught me something valuable about power. It's not about the position you hold, but about how far you're willing to go to protect the people who matter. Isabella had mattered. Every woman Morrison had hurt mattered. And making sure he could never hurt anyone else again, that mattered most of all.